In the second part, we're just going to talk about some inconsistencies with people that are promoting the whitewashing of Christianity in the Western world. There's some consistencies that I would point out. And as I point that out, let me just say that throughout this entire recording and throughout my ministry overall, I point out inconsistencies in Reformed theology and the culture of the church. So I'm not talking about inconsistencies in this particular situation without being sensitive to the fact that there is inconsistencies in my own situation, in my confessional world that I definitely need to wrestle with. But nonetheless, here's one inconsistency that I see. So one of the things that is said in the whitewashing of Christianity conversation is that the white person, the white man in power, used his power and privilege to forge a theological tradition that was very much a product of power. So the idea is that the problem is that people in power and privilege, they use that as a means to monopolize and forge a theological tradition. Okay. So when you have that being an issue, which I would agree, this issue, I think people in power using their elite privileges as the grid to work out their theology in light of their unique, distinctive privilege. I have a problem with that. One of the reasons why I'm a Presbyterian, which decentralizes ecclesiological power, is for that reason. One of the reasons why I'm a confessional person that holds to a historic tradition with many people written down over the centuries, consolidating creedal truth, is because I'm not into the evangelical, your local pastor is the guy who monopolizes truth, and whatever he says about the Bible is what you believe. So I understand that. But when you have people like in Acts 29 that are our leaders or word leaders like Leon's Crump saying that on panels, what is the solution to this issue that we see? And that is, you need to give us your power. Okay? The minority needs the power of the white guy, the white man, to now forge a theological trajectory. So I see that as a gross inconsistency. And this is one of the reasons why people like myself, when they see you flush out things, it sounds very much like Karl Marx. The issue at hand is who has power. And rather than seeing that dynamic and that narrative, have and have-nots, as being a problematic narrative, it seems like you just play into it now. Well, the issue is now that people that don't have power need to have power, as opposed to the power narrative being the issue. I see that as an inconsistency. A new set of elites who are not the elites is not the solution. That always leads to the same thing over. Distribution of power is always distribution of power in the way I'm describing always leads to a new set of elites. I know this very well from my family's narrative in Cuba. Second is the inconsistency of partiality. So in the whitewashing world, they call out partiality, and I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that exercise and activity. In the present, I talk about partiality with minorities and majority folk regularly in my church. I understand it. However, many in this conversation simply either explicitly or implicitly do the same. How so? When you say that Christianity in the West, okay, has become hijacked, corrupted, and compromised because of one kind of person, okay, you're being partial. It's not that you addressing, okay, what white people have done. Now remember why I'm doing the quotes, because I don't believe that category of anthropology. Even if people have articulated and understood things that way, I don't think it's necessarily real. When you blame the totality of evangelicalism's dysfunction, okay, in the present and in the West where we are, on one group as distinctly having a responsibility in themselves and their color as others, you being partial, you being reverse racist, straight up. You simply are. Not because you address it, but because the way you address it with this absolute totalitarian way of describing that group having the responsibility. You also, when people that look like you and when people that look like you in the minority context do something wicked, you oftentimes are partial to them simply because they look like you. What do I mean by that? You know, when you have people that get put in political power, and by the way, white folks do this too. When you have people put in political power that look like you, you celebrate them, you promote them, simply because they look like you. That's partiality, bro. When Sonia Sotomayor, I don't know how, maybe I'm saying it wrong. Sonia Sotomayor, La Boricua, the Puerto Rican that was made a Supreme Court justice, yo, I didn't celebrate her because she's Puerto Rican, okay? I don't celebrate people that endorse genocide of people. So the issue with me is that there is a partiality in this other conversation, which sometimes mimics that. Also, what I've seen too is I see a lot of people celebrate people because they're a Latino theologian or they're a black theologian, and they say, I'm reading these people because they have this color. Listen, that's partiality, bro. You should never read somebody because they look like you. You should read somebody because they sound like Jesus, okay? Because they sound like Scripture. And yeah, whatever they look like should not be the X factor. But when you're on social media and you're celebrating and promoting the fact that everyone you're reading looks like you, and that's why you're reading them, you're just being partial. You read somebody because they're godly, they're Christ-centered, and they're Spirit-filled, and yeah, they happen to look like you. But reading somebody or putting someone on a platform or celebrating something because they look like you, it is just another way of being partial. And so there's a partiality in this conversation that I think in some ways mimics their frustrations at times. Another thing about the inconsistencies in the whitewashing crew and conversation is they do the same things that they criticize when it comes to whitewashing. What do I mean by that? Okay. Whenever you hear people in the evangelical Christian world say things like this is vocabulary, okay, that has a trail that you got to follow. When you hear them say hegemony, systemic, okay, when you hear them say things like white supremacy, decolonization, oppressed, oppressor, these are terms, okay, that if you follow the trail is the language of white academic elites. So you guys are talking about the whitewashing of Christianity when you're washing Christianity with all this vocabulary that when you follow the trail, it is the intelligentsia of majority people. And someone will say, no, I'm not quoting those people. I'm not reading those people. Like, I'm quoting W.E.B. Du Bois. however you pronounce that. Well, guess what? Where was he educated? In Europe. In Europe. With the intelligentsia elites and whatnot. So you may be quoting somebody, doesn't look like a majority elite, but they have been trained in the ideologies of a lot of these elite people. So when I hear the whitewashing conversation, and I hear people use vocabulary that has a connection to ideology and the intelligentsia elite majority think tank machines, I'm like, you whitewashing the gospel, bro, straight up. You whitewashing the gospel with German folk. Whether you recognize it or not. You know, sometimes people tell me, I'm not reading them, folks. It's in the water. It's in our universities. It's in our elementary schools. It's in our seminaries. Let me tell you something. If you read someone like Tim Keller, he's reading these folk. Okay? And so it's in the water, and it comes out with the vocabulary, follow the trail. Secondly, when someone like myself or someone like, you know, in the African American community looks at majority people, white folk, and says, if y'all serious about having a reconciled future, give us your power. Bro, you whitewashing the gospel. You're basically saying that I need you and your particular status to advance Christianity. You whitewashing the gospel by looking at people because of their privilege and their color and saying, I need that to be a brown or black Christian. That's whitewashing the gospel. And when I see majority folks, you know, talk to people like on my end of the spectrum, like, yo, we're gonna give you our power and our privilege, you know, so you can advance Christianity. I don't need your stinking color power. I'm not whitewashing the gospel by assuming that I need your political, economic, situational power to be a Christian and advance the gospel. Okay? Maybe some of you have not thought in those terms, but there's a lot of ways you can whitewash the gospel beyond what oftentimes is oversimplified as. All right, next inconsistency in this conversation is the politicizing of the gospel. So one of the things that my brothers in the whitewash conversation will say is that in the majority church, there is a politicizing of the gospel. There is this confusion of Americanity and Christianity. There's a confusion with us being a holy nation and, you know, being a part of this nation. There is a collapsing of the kingdom of Christ and the kingdom of America. Okay. I would agree. I agree with that statement. I deal with that stuff. That's real. But guess what? Y'all do the same thing. You do the same thing. It's interesting to me how all the conversations of those in political power are the same conversations that you're having. The white supremacy one, you know, the colonizing ones. These conversations that you're having about reality are the same ones that's happening in Hollywood, in universities, in mainstream media, and big tech. Okay? So you're looking at these Christians who are Americanizing Christianity and collapsing Fox News narratives and talking about these things with this dilution. But you guys are talking about the same things that the left is talking about. And then you may say something like this. That's because mainstream media and Hollywood and universities are borrowing from us. Let me get this straight. Evangelical. You think that Hollywood, mainstream media, and universities are following and borrowing your small, tiny circle of very little relevance in the power narrative. They're not. Hollywood is not a follower of what evangelicals who are in this whitewashing conversation are about. They're not following you. But you seem to be very much echoing and mimicking their steps. The things they say are the things you say. Just because you add gospel and say gospel to these conversations doesn't make them actual gospel conversations. You know, footnoting the gospel and referencing the gospel and just, you know, baptizing gospel language to this stuff does not make it actual gospel conversations. And so I've dealt with this myself. You know, I look at MAGA Christianity and I've addressed it. When I got here to this church, there was, in a year, a trickle exodus of MAGA Trump-loving Christianity. But guess what? When y'all were pointing the fingers at that politicized Christianity, the MAGA Americanity Christianity, you intertwine yourself with the political movement of things like BLM. That is a political movement. And you say, well, for BLM, for me, it wasn't a political thing. It was a image of God thing. That's almost like me saying the swastika for me was not about German supremacy, but it was just about loving my neighbor. You can't take things and organizations and movements that are organized to be anti-God, anti-Christianity, and then say, for me, I'm going to wed them together with the church and ministry and preaching. I'm going to wed them together in a way that kind of like, you know, reshifts it for me. So you guys are very political, okay? In the same way that a lot of people in church were celebrating things that were right-wing causes, you were doing the same thing, okay? In the same way people confuse America with the church, you confuse America with your city, you confuse the church with your city, you confuse your community with the church, and you collapse those things, you know? You're the guys who, when the media was talking about January 6th, you were talking about January 6th. You're the guys when the people in power were talking about if you love your neighbor, you're gonna get vaccinated, and you're gonna close your church, and you're gonna wear a mask. You are the guys that literally were parroting what they were saying. So let me just say this. I don't want to hear this idea that majority white people in evangelicalism have this tendency to interwed and interlock political things that are social political with gospel things. You do the same, and I don't like either. Okay, you have panels in your church with sociologists that are doing those kind of things. So the politicization of Christianity is not something that is the white man's problem. The intertwining of MAGA and Christianity is seen by the intertwining of BLM and Christianity and whatnot. The politicization part of the conversation is very much intertwined and confused and collapsed. And I'm hoping there's some people like myself that are willing to look at both of those kinds of things on both sides and call it for what it is, you know. So when a Christian talks about abortion, he's politicizing the gospel. I've heard you say that. And a lot of those folks probably are. But guess what? When a Christian gets up and starts talking about white supremacy and white oppression, when a Christian gets up and starts talking about immigration rights, that's gospel. Right. Both of you guys are oftentimes committing the same error. See, the thing is, we talk about the world we live in a way that is biblical, theological, textual, redemptive, historical, and when we talk about these things, we talk about them in a way that reflects the supremacy of the triune redemptive narrative. But the whitewash Christianity conversation politicizes the gospel all the time. Not everybody, but very often so. Another thing about inconsistency here is the demonization of differentiation. So one of the things that the whitewashed conversation, the conscious woke, whatever you want to say, white woke, black woke, whatever, is they demonize people. They rightly challenge and confront how people have been demonized both in the past, far past, shorter past, and immediate past for being different. Yep, that's wrong. So do you. I'm someone who has differed from you. And you know what? You would call someone like me, or others like me. I've been called a white supremacist. I've been called someone who would own slaves. I've been called a non-Christian because I differ from you about certain elements of the conversation. So while you rightly confront the demonization of somebody, the dehumanizing of somebody because of what they look like and their ethnic status, you do the same thing. You dehumanize people, you belittle people, you demonize them, you unchristianize them because they differ from you. I got a few more thoughts. So one of the things that is said in the whitewashing crowd is that here's the issue: is that white people have objectified their experience upon everybody else. The white experience has become the ecclesiological Christian experience, and yes, that has happened. Yes, that still happens. I've had to lead through that in situations in my pastoral ministry. People filtering Christianity through whiteness, and I think that is not an inappropriate conversation to ever have. Okay, but guess what? Now, what the conscious crowd, what the progressive crowd and the PC want us to do, now we're supposed to understand everything through minority experiences. All of Christianity is supposed to be filtered through the objectivization of the minority experience. That is not the solution, okay? Here's what the solution is. And I'm going to get to like the theological solutions, is we filter things as people that are either majority or minority context through the experiences of Jesus. That's Christianity. It's not saying the solution to someone who's objectivized whiteness is to objectivize and filter now Christianity through and I know some people say that we're not supposed to blackwash the gospel as a solution to whitewashing the gospel. You need to do more than say that. Okay? You can't just say that and then flush things out in a way that intuitively leads to that anyways. You know what I'm saying? The key to Christianity is that the experiences of Jesus in the experience of the Spirit of God through the narrative of God Almighty, and that would be what we filter our personal narratives through. But objectivizing somebody else is not the solution. One of the things that has happened as well, and I'm getting close to the end, is that in the whitewash conversation, the conversation has been streamlined. So one of the things I have is here's a problem is that majority folks, white folks, have streamlined the conversation, in Christianity very often. They've streamlined those things. Well, guess what? I have literally heard many well-known leaders say, when people that differ from us, disagree from us, we don't need to talk to them. We don't need to listen to them. We just need to basically move on and just, and cancel them. And basically only your yes men, okay? Only your yes men that pretty much just parrot what you say are the people that are a part of the conversation. You have streamlined the conversation. And it's almost like when you listen to like the conversation in the public arena, it's like these folk are constantly talking to themselves and their circles of people, and they're streamlining it and with their parrots. And I'm saying that the streamlining of majority folks in the past or the present is not going to be remedied by streamlining the conversation the way you guys oftentimes do. And here's the last thought about inconsistency. So one of the things I've noticed is that the way that the whitewashing community addresses like Hebrew Israelites and a lot of these like minority identity cults, they address this issue of Christianity being a white man's religion by saying this theologian wasn't white and this theologian wasn't white. And so you see, because these theologians weren't white, okay, therefore, because these theologians weren't white, therefore our Christianity is legit. You're playing their own game. You see? You're playing their own game. They're saying that our religion is based upon, our color categories, right? Our tribal circles. And they're saying your Christianity is illegitimate because it's based upon white men. And you're responding to their game by playing their game and saying, look, Athanasius was probably like a really dark dude. But here's the thing. Christianity is Jesus was a Jewish God-man dude. That's where it goes. The issue with American evangelicalism, for better or for worse, or I say for worse, let's just say, is that they make Christianity more about the Christian than Christ. And let me tell you something, the identity cults in minority communities, they will not be satisfied by you saying that some of your theologians were dark. They will only be satisfied when Jesus himself, the Jewish God-man, becomes hijacked through their ultimacy filter. Don't play their game. Don't play their game. Our religion is based upon a Jewish man who was more than a man, second person of the Trinity, and not less than a man, but not how much melanin we can count in the stream of theological history. Okay? In Miami, the gospel is not contingent upon how many people that are Cuban that I can count, or Puerto Rican that I can count, or Haitian that I can count, being mouthpieces for the gospel. That is not the linchpin. So that'll be enough for us in the inconsistency section, and now we're going to move on to the deeper theological issues in part 3.